Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this UUK University Sustainability in the Climate Emergency webinar. Great to see so many people joining us. I'm Professor Judith Petts. I'm Vice-Chancellor at the University of Plymouth, but I chair the UUK Guild HE Climate Action Steering Group and have done for a few years now. So during the webinar, please do get involved as much as possible. Please use the Q&A function and ask your questions there to our speakers, and we will collate those and try and cover a number of issues that you raise. You can also use the chat to add your own views and insights and suggestions about the topics, and we'll collate all of those for future discussion in UUK. If you'd like to tweet, please do so. Our tag is @UUK events. Just to say that this is a public event. I know there are some press in attendance who are very welcome, but just to note that we are recording the webinar and you'll receive an email from UUK events afterwards to tell you when it's available to view. So we have three great speakers this morning, but before I introduce them, just to give you a little more about why we're here today and what we're hoping to cover. When you registered for the webinar, you had an opportunity to identify a number of issues that you'd like to see discussed. We had a fantastic response to that, over 400 suggestions, which we're not going to get through in 25 or 35 minutes. So just to say, we have collated all those into some themes, and I will pick those up with our panelists first. First of all, many of you wanted to hear about how to encourage our institutions to take a holistic view around sustainability in the climate crisis and how to embed that into institutional strategy. And how do we ensure that institution-wide activities are encouraged and become a priority. Following that, there were a lot of comments about engaging staff and students themselves to be focused on tackling the climate crisis, especially just at the moment when we see a cost of living crisis as well. How do we communicate, and can we see actually opportunities around what we need to do for cost of living crisis in relation to opportunities around sustainability and climate action? There was a whole suite of questions around universities operating globally. How do we ensure we're lowering emissions when we are international institutions in terms of recruitment of both our staff and students, in terms of our research and innovation portfolios, which of course have major international impact. And so how do we balance that impact against our impact on climate? And then the fourth area was very much about sustainability in teaching and learning. And a key concern, how do we embed climate considerations to all of our teaching and bring climate awareness and justice across our teaching portfolios and our curriculum? And then I suppose the issue, most important, what do we do in our own back gardens? What do we do on our own estates? How do we make sure we are energy efficient, green and diverse? And that's also an expectation from government. Many will be aware that the Department for Education published its own sustainability plan in 2021. And in that are a whole set of expectations for the sector and FE colleges and schools as well around baselining their emissions, reporting on their emissions, and also developing climate action plans by 2025. Just to update briefly on the emissions reporting, any minute now, a formal report from that work will be published. They say the 24th of December, but that's always the date that's given at this time of year for publication of everything. But we do expect to see the Department for Education with full ministerial support, supporting an emissions reporting framework, which will be formally published by the DFE in January. The expectation is that it will provide a standardized framework for for universities and colleges to work to, with a view to developing experience of using that framework with the idea that there may be a mandatory requirement for reporting by 2025. There is already mandatory requirement in Scotland. Importantly, it covers scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, and so can be really useful, but also, of course, quite important for bringing everyone up to speed and feeling able to report. So that's just an update on something that's quite imminent. The other thing that was quite imminent is that we've just heard through the UK steering group on work by UKRI to develop views about sustainability in research and innovation. Consultation will commence in the new year, and with the view to considering how to make our research and innovation sustainable in its practice, including issues of offsetting. So again, in the new year, we would expect to see institutions being consulted on that. UKRI, I know, would be the first to admit they have to get their own house in order, considering the huge volumes of research they fund and the facilities that they run themselves. So anyway, we will come back to those core concerns that you've all raised. Three speakers will briefly introduce themselves when I go to each of them and just give 5-minute reflections from their own organizations, their current priorities when it comes to climate change and sustainability. And please do start sending in any further messages in the Q&A function. But I'll turn now to our first speaker, who is Maria Rabanser, who's the Sustainability Officer for King's College London. She's responsible for climate action initiatives at King's College London, introducing the King's Climate Action Network, King's CAN. She works across the university to embed climate and sustainability actions into their processes and activities and lead on all environmental sustainability reporting. So Maria, over to you for some quick reflections from yourself. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for giving me the time today to speak to you about what we do at King's. So I wanted to briefly introduce the work that I do around the King's Climate Action Network, which you've briefly mentioned. So like many other universities, King's has a 2020 reduction target on our carbon emissions that was set by HEFCE. And then we also had a net zero target to go beyond that. But our initial carbon management plan ran from 2010 to 2020. So when we not just achieved, but exceeded the reduction target that we set, the reduction target for 2020, the question for King's was, what do we do next? How do we get to a net zero? And how do we make a new plan that really reflects the entirety of like what our impact is as a university? So when we went about coming up with a new climate action plan, we had a few key principles that we wanted to follow. The first one was that we knew that we needed to involve students and staff to make sure that the plans are representative of the King's community and of the passion and the research interests of our students and staff across the institution. The other thing that we really wanted to do was we wanted it to go beyond just the estate and for it to be a really ambitious climate action plan. The previous target, it was very much focused on the carbon emissions from our estate. It was scope 1 and 2 emissions, so just our energy emissions. But we felt that as a university, we can have a much broader impact and look at climate action in a much more holistic way. So when we started looking at how we can come up with this plan, that was another key thing that we wanted to do. So we decided that we would want to co-create the plan with students, staff, also alumni if they wanted to be involved as well. And so we then decided to set up a King's Climate Action Network that's interdisciplinary and open to all student, staff and alumni at King's. To make sure that it is very holistic, we set up 7 subgroups within the network, which covered a pretty wide range of things. We had a group looking at the zero carbon estate. We had a group looking at travel. We had a group looking at our supply chain, so the very classic high emission areas. But then we also had a group looking at education. We had a group looking at research, community engagement, and investment. So it was really a very broad remit that the Climate Action Network had. It was a little bit of an experiment. We did set it up in October 2020, so everything was still online. We didn't know whether it would work to really get a community and a lot of engagement going while doing it completely online. But overall, I think it was very successful. So in that first year, over 200 students and staff actually signed up to be part of the network. And I think it's now actually grown to more than 400 or 450 students and staff. They've continued to really want to be involved and to be part of all of this. it was really successful, even just in its first years. In the first year, the aim was to co-create the climate and sustainability action plan to come up with recommendations of what students and staff think the university should be doing to go towards a net zero target, and also to really not just minimize the negative impacts, but maximize the positive impacts we can have. So in our first year, students and staff came up with 45 recommendations that we then integrated into our action plan, which is due to be published soon. And some of the groups we actually found didn't just stop at making the recommendations, they actually started going way beyond that and started to already take actions. So one of the groups, which was our students in education group, said that once they had the recommendations, they had their ideas, and they said, we want to now go and present that to someone at King's. So we asked the Vice Principal for Education if they would be happy to hear about it. And they were actually very interested in hearing what the students and staff had to say. So in the end, we organized a presentation for them. And I think we had, in the end, had 3 of our vice principals actually attend and hear the presentations from our students and staff, which again made the students feel really listened to and like King's was taking them seriously. Our responsible investment group invited the finance team who are responsible for our endowment in to talk to them about how it currently works and to learn more about it. And then they started inviting sustainability team members from other universities to hear about how it works in their institutions. So they already started doing engagement. Our research group organized an interdisciplinary research showcase where they invited researchers to present on what they're currently doing in their faculty and what they might want to have some interdisciplinary collaboration with. So a lot of the groups really went beyond just coming up with the recommendations and really started working towards implementation. And that's what we then moved the network towards. So once we had the climate and sustainability action plan drafted, we now really focus on how we can continue to involve students and staff in the governance around it, and also in that kind of very action-driven kind of next part of the program. And overall, I think it has really driven action and helped us get buy-in across the institution. So having students and staff involved has been really, really powerful for us and in getting that kind of institution-wide buy-in. I also just wanted to briefly touch on kind of what I think of some of the most important issues that HE needs to tackle around climate action. And I think that's really what we've done around taking that holistic view and not just looking at our estate, but also going beyond that and really looking at what we do around research, what we do around education, what we do and how we engage with the local community, as well as internationally. But that being said, it is also still important to get our operations in order, and kind of that element of walking the talk and making sure that we get our own estates to net zero as well. Because I think a lot of universities like King's probably have a big heritage estate, a lot of buildings that will probably need quite significant investments, especially with the current energy crisis. It's probably also an important thing to remember.
That's great, Maria. Many thanks. That's a really powerful message, and I have seen the King's can written up, and it's an impressive piece of work. Our second speaker is Laura Lork. She's president of the Cambridge Climate Society. She's a student currently studying politics and sociology. She's represented youth interests at international events, including the Youth Climate Summit and most recently at COP27. And as I say, is president of the Cambridge Climate Society. So Laura, over to you for very much student view.
Hi, thank you. So yeah, I'll follow a similar structure and just give a brief overview of the work that I do, particularly how it relates to education, and then look at some of the key things that I think universities could do a lot more to tackle effectively. So Cambridge Climate Society, as I'm sure is a society and lots of other universities, looks at sort of connecting, educating and empowering young people on what is essentially the most sort of defining and challenging issue of our generation. I think one of the things that's very central to us is that we recognise that this can take a lot of different forms. So environmental advocacy doesn't necessarily have one kind of prescribed way that it looks, whether it's sort of diehard activism or just having the literary sort of climate literacy to be able to have a conversation with your grandparents about what's going on. We try to make sure that anyone who wants to learn and wants to engage with climate change can come to us, and we can help them develop these skills and these tools and this knowledge through mentoring events, educational opportunities, all sorts of different things to try and help people engage with the climate crisis. And then, so on a sort of broader scale, more recently, I had the opportunity to attend COP27 as a part of the university delegation. And here I was primarily working on ACE negotiations. So ACE, sorry, it is a lot of acronyms. ACE stands for Action on Climate Empowerment. And I was working on it through YOUNGO, which is the UNFCCC Youth Constituency. So it's essentially a mechanism to make sure that young people are concretely getting into negotiation rooms. Now, ACE, I kind of see it as a global reflection of what CCS does. It's very similarly oriented to making sure that any member of can engage with climate. And so that is through public awareness training, it's through education, it's making sure that people have these skills and they have these capacities to be able to do what they want to on this matter. And so an ACE action plan is something that's been on the agenda since the first COP. So back in 1995, quite a long time before I was born. And this was the first year that was finalised. So that was a massive win. But what became very clear to me was this distinction between getting young people in the room and getting young people in the room who have the capabilities and the training and the skills to actually engage with negotiations as equals. Because it's brilliant that we're being given a seat at the table and that people are listening to us. But in many senses, this table isn't working. And not to sort of to paraphrase this very famous quote, it's like, no, we don't want a seat at your table. We're building our own table and you can come join us here. And that's something that's obviously very difficult to say in the context of UN systems and UN structures, but it highlights the very sort of systemic and structural aspect of this crisis. And I think bringing that into how universities can do more to respond, it's in recognizing that universities can be sort of transnational actors of environmental justice, you equally have to recognize their propensity of environmental injustice, and which course and how you act has a massive sort of consequences at every level. So some of the things I think sort of universities can do a lot more to respond to, on the first is challenging these systems. If we're looking at what we can do, we have to also look at how we're upholding these systems of oppression and these structures. Universities across the UK and in the US are still receiving significant fossil fuel funding. And this, we have to understand, is having impacts as to, okay, how are they shaping the conversations that are being had? What conversations are being had? Who's in the room? And how is this fundamentally sort of shaping the knowledge production of universities? Another one, I think, is looking at this sort of idea of barriers to engagement with climate. There are so many reasons not to be involved, from political reasons, financial reasons, just time, energy. There's a lot of reasons not to engage with climate change. And I think a large part of what universities can do is reduce these barriers, both in an academic sense, so in providing sort of education modules, ways from different degree points to sort of interact from an academic standpoint with the issue, but also practically in terms of resources, in terms of providing an infrastructure for action that has funding and engagement and teaching and lots of different things. So that's just a sort of brief overview, and no, thank you for having me, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Laura. And then our final panelist is Charlotte Kelly. Charlotte is policy, different perspective now, policy advisor to the CBI's innovation strategy. She works on R&D policy as well as leading on CBI's green innovation business-to-business B2B campaign, which focuses on supporting businesses get started and move along their green innovation journeys. And of course, the interesting thing is that universities are also businesses in many respects. And so I think there's a great deal of overlap, and we partner with businesses a great deal. So Charlotte, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Morning, everyone, and thanks to Universities UK for having me. I think this is a kind of really interesting topic, and as Professor Pett said, I think hopefully I can bring a kind of business perspective to this discussion, because universities are businesses, and I guess it's important to mention as well, we've got about 80 universities in membership of the CBI as well, so I work very closely with universities on a daily basis. Yeah, so I'm Charlotte. I am a policy advisor for the CBI. For those of you who don't know what that stands for, that's the Confederation of British Industry. We're the UK's kind of premier business organisation, and we represent the voices of about 190,000 businesses in the UK. I think the first thing to mention is that for the CBI, decarbonisation is an organisational priority. We have a whole team that work on the kind of full spectrum of decarbonisation policy issues. and for us it's kind of a non-negotiable when it comes to government. We have kind of a number of mechanisms in place to support businesses on their decarbonisation journeys. We have a kind of sustainability community, which is a kind of peer-to-peer group that focuses on embedding best practice and sustainability across organisations. And then looking into next year, the CBI are going to be doing a kind of cross-organisational project called Green Growth, which is going to kind of focus on why the UK is really well positioned to succeed in the green growth opportunity, and where the government can kind of really support the areas where we can gain strategic advantage as the UK. And if you want to find out, if anyone on the webinar wants to find out more about any of those, do get in contact. But as an introduction to kind of the work that I personally do, I work in our innovation policy team, so a bit different, and I kind of have two hats in my role. The first is kind of creating a policy environment that really encourages businesses to invest in R&D and innovation, of which collaborating with universities plays a massive role. And the second is really to support businesses to kind of get started on their innovation journeys. And over the past year, kind of as part of this role, I've been leading a project at the CBI called Be More Green. And Be More Green, as Professor Petz says, is a project to kind of support businesses really get started and move along their green innovation journeys. We think there's kind of a massive business case for businesses and universities to be innovating to decarbonise and be more sustainable. I guess primarily through reducing your carbon emissions and environmental impact, but also innovation means that businesses are more resilient to future shocks. They kind of reduce their operating costs, attract talent, create jobs, and improve their kind of sustainability credentials on the whole. So in short, we're really, really keen to kind of empower organisations to be more green, because the benefits are kind of really wide ranging, and not just about cutting your carbon emissions, which is the primary purpose, but also reducing your operating costs when thinking about kind of the cost of living crisis. Just because of time, I won't go into too much detail, but for the project, we've kind of created like an online toolkit, which kind of supports businesses think about their kind of making their business case. And then there's kind of a lot of business case study examples that really kind of showcase what the best practice is in this area, which can be found on our website. I'm not sure if I can kind of follow up with a link to that, but that's really useful for businesses and universities. And we've got kind of really good feedback on that, because I think those kind of really practical, tangible things on how to like really get started on your journey are really important. And sometimes it's just knowing where to start is the most important thing. I think something that's kind of really relevant to this discussion today that came out of the work is the really important role of collaboration between universities and businesses in the kind of decarbonisation space. Businesses are working with universities to decarbonise their campuses. For example, University of Birmingham and Siemens are working with University of Birmingham to kind of create a smart net zero campus. And then universities are also really supporting businesses with their decarbonisation journeys, whether that's kind of collaborative R&D projects, sending kind of masters, PhD students to kind of do a bit of fact finding and solving issues, and yeah, really providing that expertise and skills that businesses don't necessarily have in the low carbon space. I think the important thing to remember is that no one has really got the kind of decarbonisation puzzle nailed. So it's something that businesses and universities do need to work together on and really share best practice on. I'm also not a massive expert on universities, and I'm sure the kind of colleagues on this call know more about the new university decarbonisation problem. I think there's kind of massive crossovers and lessons to be learned from businesses whose emissions are particularly around their kind of built environment. And then I think from this piece, I think I'll just pull out a couple of things that I think were really useful that businesses told us that can also be useful for universities. I think the first step when it comes to this is just understanding your emissions. Where are you having the biggest environmental impact? And then after this, you can identify, is it a quick fix, or is it something that kind of existing technology can solve, or a partnership with a business or another university could remedy? Innovative SMEs are also a really great place to look at kind of supplying technologies or data tools to really help with your decarbonisation or energy efficiency. And then if the kind of issue still can't be resolved, you may need to innovate. And obviously, as being an innovation policy advisor, I think there's wide-ranging benefits from being innovative, and this might be kind of in partnership with a business, or you might need to be looking at kind of making internal investment decisions on innovation. I think the final thing I'll just say is that the decarbonisation journey really does need to kind of involve your whole organisation, and what Maria was saying really resonated about kind of getting everyone involved. You really need that buy-in from kind of top to bottom of your organisation, and I think we'll come on to that later in the discussion. But I think, yeah, having that buy-in can really kind of keep businesses and universities really focused on decarbonisation and tackling the climate crisis.
Great, thanks very much, Charlotte. Right, let's move to the sort of 5 or 4 certainly areas of questioning that had come up before. By the way, someone's asked if they could have a link to the DFE climate emissions reporting work, standardized emissions reporting work. I'll try and put that up. Can't do it while I'm in the middle of doing this, but we'll certainly from UK try and give a link to DFE work, which particularly is through EAUC, so it's easy to pick up. So anyway, let's go to this strategy, and just to follow up really what Maria and Charlotte were saying, a lot of discussion around competing priorities. Everyone's got competing priorities. So I wonder if perhaps Maria first and then Charlotte could just pull out 1 or 2 quick things that you think are crucial to trying to get buy-in within institutions, whether it's businesses or universities. What's really crucial in that competing priorities? So perhaps Maria first.
Yeah, very happy to. I think for us, what's been really important is having that co-creation of the plans, the co-creation element, because by the time we then started presenting the climate and sustainability action plan and the actions within that, so many students and staff had already heard about it from either being involved in the creation or having seen it before when it was presented to them. And I think it just really gave it a lot of legitimacy, and everyone could see the passion of students and staff involved in it. Because in the Climate Action Network, we didn't just have, well, we had a combination of students and staff. We also had staff whose roles were very relevant to the topics being discussed, but then we also had those who simply had a really strong interest in it. So I think that co-creation was really important. And I think also having a senior champion and finding a senior champion for the work has been really, really valuable for us. And then being able to work with them to make sure that they're carbon literate and that they feel comfortable and confident in championing sustainability at a senior level. So a champion can also be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, when we developed the UK guidance published back in 21, that was really number 1, was to have senior buy-in and leadership, and including at sort of board of governors and councils of governors level as well, and driving that commitment through. Charlotte, reflections from you from a business point of view.
Yeah, so I mean, completely agree with what Maria's just said. From a business perspective, I think the buy-in from the top level is really important. I think from a business level, there needs to be someone kind of at a board level who can really kind of champion and articulate that sustainability vision. Like net zero, circular economy language is not things that kind of people at a board level understand. So if there's someone that can really kind of represent that view and tell kind of the board what that means for the company and what the real benefits are, I think that's really important. From conversations I've had with businesses, there's a few kind of really great examples. CGI, who are an IT company, they employed a chief sustainability officer about a year ago, and their CEO said to me that basically she's bent the whole organization out of shape. She's made everything the kind of company is doing about decarbonisation and sustainability, and they've kind of really benefited from it. They're investing in green innovation projects, they're engaging with academia on what they can do on this, and it's kind of really been really beneficial for the business. And I mean, I'm not sure if anyone was at COP, and you might have seen the CGI pavilion had a massive globe. Lots of people have been talking about it, and that's all because of that kind of really senior level person that sat on the board and has really, as they said, bent them out of shape. And another kind of really good example, I think, is Anglo-American, not your typical kind of green company, a mining company, massive energy intensive. And I spoke to them, and they said that in 2014, their kind of CEO and technical director set up an Anglo-American's innovation group. And this is because they've set a target to be net zero by 2040, but they're a massive energy intensive. And they said the only way they can physically get to that target is to make an 100% commitment to innovation. So they've set up this group. They've ring-fenced budget around innovative projects to really target their kind of massive energy intensive projects. And from this, they've really been tackling areas like they've created a green energy company in South Africa, so they don't use coal anymore. They've created a hydrogen truck, so they don't mine trucks, so they don't use diesel anymore. So it's like having that kind of CEO level buy-in has meant they can kind of really ring fence budget and make really good investment decisions to decarbonize. I think top level, really, really important, I think necessary, but I think it is also important to mention kind of bottom up initiatives. I think you need to kind of really ensure that all voices from all parts of the business or the university are also empowered, so they kind of really come along with that journey as well. I think from talking to businesses, some of the most innovative ideas can come from the bottom of the business. So really empowering those voices to get that buy-in across the sector can be really useful. Again, another great example, Compass Group, a food company, they kind of set challenges for their chefs to create meals that have the least embodied carbon. So they make it fun and exciting, but then they also massively reduce their kind of carbon emissions, because a lot of it is around kind of the embodied scope 3 carbon in their food. Oracle, a tech company, have an innovation portal for staff to kind of submit ideas, and lots of those ideas have actually pulled through to the organisation. So I think from that, I think the staff really need to see the benefits for them to be bought in as well. And these kind of really bottom up projects mean that people will also kind of leave organisations with that real passion for sustainability and innovation, which I think is also really important, because bottom-up initiatives in universities will mean that people are kind of leaving universities and flowing into the business community with kind of an understanding of sustainability and innovation and the imperatives around them.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move to the teaching and learning question, because there's a great question that's coming in the chat in relation to, particularly around students who commute to learning, and issues about how you reach commuter students who have lower engagement on the whole with the campus that they're coming to, and are there particular ways of developing and including through blended learning? So just a question that's come in that's quite interesting. My own institution has 30% commuter students, and we know that they tend to be more mature students with families, etc., really important in health areas like nursing, etc., and so quite different to our on-campus students. So I'm going to come to Laura first, and how do you think we can really ensure that all of our students are really well informed about sustainability and climate action, perhaps through curricula, etc.? So I'll come to Laura first, and then perhaps to Maria afterwards.
Absolutely. I mean, speaking as someone who has a commute of about 10 minutes, I'm probably not the strongest person to talk on this. But in terms of curricula, I think absolutely it's recognising that climate isn't a siloed issue. It's not something that you can have a very generic model of climate education that can then be slotted into any degree, but it's recognising specifically how issues of climate are going to specifically interact with what subject a student is studying and how that can be interesting to them. So the example you gave of nurses, for example, I've got several friends studying medicine at other universities who had a whole module on this idea of reforming the NHS and how it looks for it to be a more sustainable business model, how all these different things work. And that is obviously content that's going to be a lot more interesting, a lot more engaging, and a lot more relevant than looking at the specifics of climate science. So I think it's recognizing that it's not about a sort of generic education that can just be fit anywhere, but looking at these sort of specific dynamics and how specifically we can interact and engage with people also on their own terms, and on how climate is going to be affecting their industry in the next 15, 20 years. I mean, one of the really big things is that our labour market is going to massively shift. The needs that people have from us are going to massively shift, and yet education isn't changing to reflect that. And so to match this up, we have to be looking at sort of creating and sort of molding young people that are dynamic and they are resilient and they are flexible to these needs and that can fit into these different situations.
Great answer. Great reflections, Laura. Maria.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Laura said. It's really important to make the material really accessible. I mean, one of the things that we've done at King's, because we're not quite at the stage yet where we have it embedded into like all of our different degree programs. So one of the things that we did is we co-created with students an online sustainability module. So it's called Sustainability and Climate, and it takes students right through the basics of what is sustainability, what is climate change, and then into kind of very specific topics. It covers economy and sustainability, it covers climate justice, food sustainability, so lots of different topics. But the really nice thing about the module is that students can do it in their own time. So it's open normally from October to, I think, March or April time. And students can engage as deeply as they want with it. So normally it's built in a way to introduce the broader topic, give them some resources to learn more, and then if they want to, also give them the resources to go and take action, either in their own lives or around the university. So it's a really accessible way, and it's all online, so students can just do it on their own time. They can enroll through our online learning platform and then do an hour a week, or they can do, like if they have a specific time set aside, they could do quite a few sections in just 1 week. But also really important to also give that recognition and make it worth their while as well. So for our online module, students then get an award at the end of it as well. And we have this thing called the King's Experience Award. The students can then get formal recognition for doing these extracurricular things as well, which then often helps them with their CV, which can then also make it seem more worthwhile to do this. But we also recognize that we need to move towards making sure that it's linked into degrees. So one of the things that we're looking at with the Climate Action Network this year is creating those resources and looking at how we could embed sustainability and climate teaching into the different courses. And I know there's a lot of resources out there, like SSDK, I think, have some guidance on how to integrate it into different degrees, like Laura was saying about like the example of nursing, because it might be really obvious how it fits into an environmental degree or geography degree, but it might be less obvious how it fits into medical degrees, which is what we have a lot of at King's as well. So yeah, it's really about kind of making it accessible for us.
Great, and there's also a really great question, a comment in the chat from Reading, which I am aware of the work they're doing, and there's just this issue about what we do with pre-university level education around climate issues and our relationship to our schools and colleges and pupils there. There's a link in to Reading's climate action work, which is linked into the DFE. So if anyone wants to see that, a quite important issue about supporting schools and colleges and bringing students through from there to universities with pre-knowledge and engagement and excitement. Okay, let's just move to this really interesting thing around cost of living crisis. So it's sort of overtaken, one might argue, climate concerns for a moment. There is a really interesting issue about whether we can capitalize on some of the things we can do to respond to cost of living that also have great sustainability and climate action responses. And I was wondering, perhaps Charlotte, has this come up with businesses at all in their reflections?
Yeah, I mean, cost of living, cost of doing business is the biggest business issue at the moment. But I think from our perspective, simply cost of living crisis and the climate crisis are the same thing. I think it's not helpful to kind of frame them as competing issues, because decarbonising and reducing your energy usage will decrease your operating costs and kind of energy bills significantly. I think previously energy costs wasn't something that company boards were talking about. Now this has become a kind of huge strategic issue, especially if the business is massively energy intensive or kind of their built environment is their biggest energy cost. So I think, yes, it's a massive issue, but also the issues they can be joined together. If you can kind of decarbonize and reduce your energy consumption, you can reduce your bills and improve your kind of cost of doing business. I think from having conversations with businesses, there are kind of a few things you can do, especially in kind of a cash-strapped environment that universities and businesses are also currently in. I think, as I said in my opening remarks, just understand your energy. I think a lot of businesses and universities don't understand where their energy is actually coming from? Is it just as simple as turning lights off or appliances being kept on? And if you can't understand or measure your energy, there are lots of kind of businesses and data platforms that can do this for you. Collaborate with a business that can kind of measure your energy for you. Because I think someone told me you can't manage what you can't measure. If you don't understand what's going on, then you're never going to be able to manage it. And I think once you really understand that usage, and you can kind of look at what solutions are already out there, learn from businesses, talk to other universities. They will have had the same problem, and they can really tell you what they did, what tools they used, whether this is kind of just changing to motion sensor lighting, or changing the types of ovens you're using in your kitchens, or looking at a kind of a larger scale and using like IoT technology to really optimize your energy use. There's so many options out there, and I think you just kind of need to get out there, talk to other businesses, talk to other universities about what they're doing. And then if the solutions aren't out there, maybe you do need to invest in innovation. And I've spoken about the kind of wide-ranging benefits from innovating, like the example of the kind of Siemens and University of Birmingham example. So I think these can't be competing priorities. Businesses and universities who decarbonise are reducing their energy costs now, and then will also be kind of more resilient to future shocks such as the climate crisis. So yeah, they really have to be kind of talked about together, not as competing priorities.
Great. And Laura, any reflections from you on student tension and concerns around cost of living, and how they feed in their own thoughts around climate response as well?
No, absolutely. I mean, I'd start by saying I completely agree with what Charlotte just said. I think seeing them as sort of competing crises only sort of doesn't produce anything very productive, whereas recognizing, I mean, it's quite similar to the discussion that happened around the start of COVID, of how COVID is going to interrupt climate action, when in fact it's just demonstrating that it's exacerbating the existing injustices in society. So whenever tension is placed on a society, it's always the most vulnerable that get hurt first. And so you're seeing how, in a sort of very kind of microcosmic example, how climate is going to impact a society in the future, which then lends itself to this sort of increasingly mainstream frame of climate justice that's recognizing all of the sort of historic dimensions and the political dimensions, and how proportionate impact. On a sort of student level specifically, I think it comes back to what I said in the opening remarks about these barriers. There are so many barriers to being involved, and finance is a very significant one to that. On a personal level, on a sort of societal level, on any scale that you look at. And what universities can do there is providing this infrastructure to support students, and that then lends itself to more engaged students.
Great. We've got 2 minutes left, and actually in the Q&A there are a whole set of reflections around the broader SDGs, global SDGs, sustainability, our impact as institutions globally around sustainability challenges, and how to embed the much broader discussion of sustainability in the SDGs into our actions. It was something that in the UK policy work there was a strong emphasis from universities that this isn't just about climate and net zero, this is about sustainability. And as we know, SDG number 1, which is probably, if you can't solve that, you're going to struggle with all the other SDGs. Number 1 is poverty, of course. So I wonder if there's any quick reflections. I'll start with Maria, and it has to be really quick because we've only got 2 minutes left, around the broader SDGs and how important that is.
I think it is really important, yes. So we at King's, we always try to include the SDGs in all of our reporting. So if you look at our environmental sustainability report, you'll see that each of the section has the SDGs there that we think it relates to. Our service team who look after social responsibility do the same. So we do try to use the SDGs to communicate that kind of that very broad spectrum of what is sustainability, to show that it's not just environmental, it's also social sustainability. I think the SDGs are a really great way of illustrating that.
Laura, I suspect, given your comments on climate justice, absolutely number 1 for you, but over to you.
Yeah, no, I think education is absolutely critical to the achievement of the SDGs. It's a bit reductive, but there was a documentary recently that cited girls' education as the number 1 solution to climate change. And so getting people in education systems and giving them access to these tools and these resources and these opportunities, I think is absolutely critical, both to responding to climate change, but also in that broader picture, being able to integrate that into sustainable development.
And Charlotte, any reflections from a business viewpoint?
I think the only reflections is that thinking about decarbonisation has to bring in the whole of the kind of ESG part of the framework. You have to think about kind of how you're impacting the social value point as well. You have to think how you're benefiting the local community around you as well. When businesses are thinking about decarbonising and doing big green innovative projects, they need to think about how they're really benefiting the local community around them. What is the social value point? Are they just decarbonising, or are they thinking about the kind of whole spectrum of the social value as well?
Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much to all our three panelists. Thank you to everyone who's also participated. There's a huge level of volume of material on the chat and also in the Q&A. And so just to say that there is a full conference coming up in January. Please do have a look at that. More extended time for thoughts and discussion. And a little bit of short feedback form has come up for you as well. But thank you very much, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of the day. Importantly, please enjoy a relaxing Christmas break and New Year. And we hope to carry on conversations with you in the new year. Thank you so much, everybody.